As the jet flies, Scotland is approximately 27 minutes long and 15 minutes wide. But within the borders of this bonny and compact country, among the heather and the mists, intertwined with the tradition of tartans and clans and kilted pipers, the mystery of the making of Scotch whisky has flourished for more than 400 years. We're in the Highlands now, not far from the little village of Craigellachie, the namesake of the Canadian settlement where the last spike was driven on the transcontinental line of the CPR. And this is the River Spey, leading us into the heartland of our mystery. Curiously enough, mystery was a word once used to describe a kind of fly for salmon fishing. But we're concerned here with a mystery that lies in the land as well as the water of the land. The water of these modest little burns bubbling through the glens. A mystery that lies in the atmosphere, the climate, the very air of Scotland. It's early spring here in the Highlands, and that's the smoke of a heather fire in the background, burning off the old to make way for the new, as we move across the moors to the edge of a peat bog. Layer upon layer of ancient moss and vegetation, centuries in the making, now being carefully cut and stored for use as another essential ingredient in the mystery. Along with this ancient earth, the water and the air, there's a fourth ingredient, barley. Each year, hundreds of thousands of tons of barley are brought to Scotland's distilleries, one of which is coming into view down there in the glen. The visitor to the distilling community encounters many surprises, including such unexpected delights as this temperamental toy train delivering barley. But it's a proud little fellow, and fair warning has been posted that one must beware of the doggedness it maintains in going about its business. The making of Scotch whisky begins with the world's finest barley. And after the barley has been cleaned, it is steeped for 2 or 3 days in tanks of water like these. The water, of course, is that soft, clear hill water that we saw tumbling along the burns and streams in the glens, as Scottish as the tartan.
When the barley is sufficiently steeped, it is discharged on the molten floor. On that floor it generates its own heat and commences to grow.
And it's here on the malting floor, with careful supervision, that the saturated barley becomes green malt.
The temperature of the malt is most important. The main behavior done in malt to give it air, to prevent mold, and control the temperature. And this floor is 3 days old. It will go into the kiln to be dried off in about 9 to 10 days.
It's at this stage that the malt encounters the influence of peat moss. The fire under the drying kiln is constantly stoked with the black bricks of ancient earth. And up in the kiln itself, we find an obliging official in ceremonial dress.
I thought you'd like to know how we know when the malt is ready for the kiln. The seed is opened to expose the small shoot, which is known as the acrospire, and this should have developed to approximately 3/4 down the seed. The center of the seed, which is comprised mostly of starch, should spread as a floury film between the finger and thumb. The smoke from the peat fire, which you saw a moment ago, is passing through this malt to give it the flavor which is characteristic of our final product.
Permeated with peat smoke, the dried malt now passes through a conventional milling process, where it is dressed and weighed and ground.
The mill grinds the malt into three portions: the husk, the fine grits, and a little flour. The three parts come together at the bottom of the mill and are then elevated to the grist hopper prior to mashing.
The grist is then transferred to enormous vessels like this one, called a mash tun, where it is mixed with more of the magical waters from the Highland Springs. Each mash tun has its own Loch Ness monster, undulating in the heated water on an endless chase after its own tail, and thereby completing the conversion of the soluble starch into maltose. This sweet liquid, technically known as the wort, is then drawn off, and the remaining spent grains and husks, called draff, are removed to be sold as cattle food. Scottish traditions prevail at every stage. Nothing is wasted. Meanwhile, the malt extract is being piped through cooling equipment and stored in vats to await its meeting with another vital ingredient. No, it's not cement. It's yeast. These huge vats, called washbacks, are almost 2 stories high with a capacity of thousands of gallons. And here the foaming yeast attacks the sweet liquid and converts it into a crude alcohol solution resembling a sort of milky beer. After the fermented liquid has been pumped away to storage tanks to await distillation, these cavernous vats are scrubbed and made ready for the next mixing of wort and yeast. This man is using a heather broom called a besom and quite a bit of body English to achieve cleanliness. In the more modern distilleries, however, the heather broom has been replaced by a pressure hose, as befits the jet age.
Now in malt whisky production, we carry out 2 distillations. The first in a wash still, and the second in a low wine still. The first distillation is to separate the crude alcohol from the unfermentable solids. The wash is charged into the wash still, heat is applied, and spirit vapors are produced. The spirit vapors pass to the condensers, which incidentally is the first part of the distillation plant under lock and key of the resident excise officer. And the liquid from the condenser is collected as a raw and impure spirit known as low wines.
The manager of the distillery now has a partner, the resident excise officer. His locks are not pickable. Their keyholes are sealed with a coated paper shield, and they greet you everywhere. This tank of cold running water contains submerged copper tubing, in which the vapors from the wash still condense into a liquid called low wines, part alcohol, part water.
This is the spirit safe. It is a glass enclosed control box and under excise lock and key. In the next compartment we have the sample glasses. These can be filled by means of this control on the outside, and from the readings on the hydrometer and the thermometer in the glasses, we know the strength of the low wines as it's passing through. And by these instruments, we can also tell when all the spirit has been collected from the wash still. The spirit collected from the wash still requires further distillation. This we do by feeding it to the low wine still. Here again, heat is applied and spirit vapors are produced. The spirit vapors pass to the condenser, where they're condensed back to liquid, and you can see them now passing through this compartment of the spirit safe. The first part of the distillate is known as foreshot, contains many undesirable substances, and that is collected for redistillation. After the necessary tests have been made by the stillman, the flow is diverted to this bowl, which is marked spirits. From here it passes to the spirit receiver, where it is collected and will eventually be filled into casks and known as Scotch whisky. When the distillate becomes too weak and contains too many impurities, the flow is again diverted. It is now known as faints and is collected for further distillation. So you can see it is the experience of the stillman, assisted by the instruments which are provided here, which makes a very important contribution to the quality of the final product.
Straight from the still, the product is a colorless liquid and rough to the palate. It is now filled into casks.
Cask filled into, and it's 522. 522.
The ever-alert excise officer.
That's cask filled 81, and it's 5316.
Most of these casks are of oak, along with a smaller number of former sherry casks, and the spirit draws color from the wood. Now the maturing process begins. And while the spirit is mellowing in the warehouses, the last of the essential ingredients enters the picture: the air of the Scottish climate. By legal definition, the spirit does not become whiskey until it has been matured in oak casks for at least 3 years. After that minimum period, quality prescribes further maturing for an additional 4 to 6 years. And during that time, there is an average evaporation of about 15%. The wood of the casks is permeable, of course, and allows the air of this unique climate to pass inwards, working on the whiskey, helping to mature it, and to modify the less desirable elements in the spirit. It has been said that any Scotsman can smell and taste the heather and the honey in a whiskey matured here in the Highlands. The climate is important also during the earlier stages of manufacture. Distilleries operate 24 hours a day, 44 weeks of the year, but the midsummer months are known as the silent season. Even during the mild warmth of a Scottish summer, temperatures are too high for the germination and fermentation stages of distilling. But in the warehouses, the maturing process is going on all the time. And periodically, the excise officer releases a fully matured collection of casks for shipment to the blender. These are the celebrated malt whiskies whose development we've been watching, and the time has come for them to be blended with other malts and with grain whiskey, a lighter and simpler spirit of less distinction, requiring less maturation. And now we're on our way to the final stage of a recipe whose taste is unique in all the world. This is the blender's sampling room with its spectrum of amber, tawny to russet, light to heavy.
Well, I have been examining samples of malt whisky, Islay malts, Highland malts, and Lowland malts. These particular whiskies are examined and nosed to make certain the characteristics and aroma are suitable for our particular blends.
The visitor may well ask at this point what percentage of grain whiskey would be added to a blend of these malts.
Well, the quantity of grain whiskey used in the blend is left to the blender himself to determine the proper quantity. It is reasonable to say 50%. The art in blending is to select and apportion the various whiskies to secure the best flavor with the finest aroma.
Each individual blender carefully follows a formula of his own, with a definite standard of quality and character in mind. On arrival at the blending warehouses, single whiskies are discharged into blending troughs in the proportions determined by the blender's formula. Next, they are run into a vat where they are roused by air to ensure thorough mixing. The capacity of these vats may vary between 500 and 20,000 gallons. Finally, they are drawn off into oak casks for yet another period of storage. This stage is known as marrying, the acquisition of blended age. And when it is complete, water is added to bring the matured blend to appropriate consumer strength. Now the whiskey is ready for bottling. A modern blending and bottling plant like this one employs over 500 people. On the other hand, you may have noticed a surprising absence of people in the distilleries we visited earlier. Vast areas, yes, and massive equipment, but very few people. Only 16 workers on the staff here. 28 to 30 is the number of personnel here, and here at one of the largest and most up-to-date of the malt distilleries, about 40 workers. The manager and his staff always live close at hand in houses provided by their respective companies. Generation upon generation, they are part of the pattern, part of the mystery. The story of the making of Scotch whisky belongs to these people. The visitor often finds their accents thicker than haggis and difficult to understand. Sometimes only an occasional date or name comes clear.
In 1920. But I had a railway manager left and you could find work after that. Pelican boxes, stuff after it.
But it isn't difficult to appreciate their individual skills in a venerable craft, and their dedication to an art that continues to defy any and all attempts at imitation. These are people who understand the slow circle of birth and growth and age.
Jimmy, what about you in your spare time?
Oh, I read a lot of books and okay, well western and Gandhi's and anything just I can get out of it. I hang with the Bible and then I read myself.
Tell us about you. Are you a family man or a bachelor?
Oh, I'm a bachelor.
You're a bachelor?
I live by myself.
You're obviously not going to change your mind at this point, huh?
Oh, well, never know.
We welcome to summing up from the production director of one of the old established companies.
You've been around our distilling community, seen something of our methods, met some of the people. Now I'd like to draw a thread through what you've seen and try to emphasize what we feel is important. Firstly, the raw materials, the water supplies drawn from the burns and springs, each the jealously guarded right of a particular distillery. The barley, which for our purpose must be of prime quality and carefully chosen. The peat, cut from the inexhaustible stocks laid down in past ages. Each is a natural product. Each is influenced by its environment, and each, we feel, lies close to the heart of the matter. And secondly, our methods, in themselves are a distillation of experience of many years' work of practical men. The malting process, you see, here again nature combines with the skill of the maltman in converting the starch of the grain into the form which we need later in the process. When the malt, of course, has been made, it has to be dried, and it is here that the fragrance of the peat fire is added. The malt is then ground into grist and extracted with hot water in the mashing process. The extract of the malt is then fermented, and it is in the fermentation stage that the whisky makes its first appearance. These apparently simple processes are in reality extremely complicated and subtly responsive to the skill of those carrying them out. They do not lend themselves to hard and fast rules, but rather rely on an understanding developed over years of experience, on lessons learned, and the patience necessary to be right. In the still house, we come to the final important stage, which many believe to be the key step in the process. Here again, each distillery has its methods, different shapes and sizes of stills, and the process relies heavily on the judgment of the stillman. You see, the character of the whisky is the constant preoccupation of the manager and his men. And of course later, this responsibility passes to the blender and bottler. The character of the whisky is preserved by adherence to the traditional ways, to the closest attention to the multitude of small details which influence the product. And last, but certainly not least, the men. I think you will agree with me that they are men of character, with a pride in their skill and with a refreshing independence of mind. I like to think that a little of this quality finds its way into the character of Scotch whisky.
The quality of a people who have conspired with the heritage of their land to create and perpetuate a mystery that places them forever among the aristocracy of those who care.